Blind Citizens Australia proudly presents the An Eye to the Future Business Workshop Series. Recognizing the career potential of people who are blind or vision impaired. We are pleased to welcome you to today's workshop, Assessments for an Inclusive Workforce. Blind Citizens Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present and future.
So welcome, thank you everybody for joining us for today's session. And I'm going to give a quick overview of An Eye to the Future and what we're doing before we introduce our first speaker, Eric. An Eye to the Future is an initiative from Blind Citizens Australia, funded through the DSS, that recognises the career potential of people who are blind or vision impaired. And we are connecting and working with employers who have the capacity to offer paid employment opportunities for people who are blind or vision impaired, and supporting the employees or the job seekers to be the best person for that role, supporting them through the resume, the cover letters, and the job readiness process as well. We support the employers every step of the way as well, from an accessible recruitment process, assistive technology where applicable, and check in with the employer and the employee as they settle into the workplace. So before we dive into the content and introduce our presenter for today's session, I would like to acknowledge that not every single person who is blind or vision impaired will require assistive technology. Some people will use standard accessibility features built into their computer, and this is largely guided by the individual and their level of vision and the requirements of the role. And also noting that should an individual's vision change over time, support can be put into place for that individual as those changes may occur. So with that, I will introduce our first presenter, Eric van Vulpen, the Deputy Director of the Centre for Technology Infusion at Trobe University, who has been successfully working with an employee through An Eye to the Future since mid-2022. And he is here to share his experience with An Eye to the Future. So over to you, Eric.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. Let me first introduce what we do at Trobe University, because that's where I work, so you understand the context. I work at a center which is called the Center for Technology Infusion. And what we've been doing for 12 years is trying to build prototypes and then of technologies that are not yet in the market, and then try them with end users to see if they do what they promise to do and to see what end users think of them. Now, in the past 4 or 5 years, I've been focusing on using that capability to make public transport more accessible. And we've been working with governments, for instance, on autonomous vehicles, reviewing the disability accessibility standards. We've been working with Transport for New South Wales to try and see if there isn't an easier way for people with disability to pay for their journeys. A little bit like the Amazon shop in New York. When you walk in, you pick up some products, you walk out, and the payment happens automatically. So we work with Transport for New South Wales to see how that can be delivered. We are working at the moment on a project which is about the rail platform gap. And there's always big gaps between platforms and trains, and then you need to ask for manual ramp. And yeah, that's not the best solution, and there's automated ramps that can be put on the platform. So we are testing those with people with disability. And we've also been working with the manufacturer of autonomous shuttles to see if you take the bus driver out of the equation, how can people with disability still be assured that, for instance, the bus stops when they're there at the bus stop, that the doors stay open long enough, that the bus doesn't leave without them being properly seated. So those are the kind of projects that we are working on. Now, since we are working on assistive technologies in transport, and that's not the only area that we're working in, but it's a major one, I thought it'd be essential to work with somebody who has a lived disability experience. And that's where I've been putting out job descriptions on LinkedIn and through a couple of my networks. And even though I thought it was a pretty nice job, working in technology, being able to work from home, being able to work flexible hours, I didn't get any response for, I guess, 6 or 8 months. Everybody said, "Oh, what a great vacancy," but nobody responded until I got a phone call from Mary and say, "Hey, I saw this. We can probably help." So then I interviewed Lenny, and Lenny is legally blind, so that means he's not totally blind, and that is very helpful because it makes it easier for the kind of work that needs to be done. But my intention was more to make sure one way or another I work with somebody with a disability on the projects, and it was kind of, from my point of view, it was kind of flexible what I wanted to get done. The main priority was to make sure that we somehow work with a person with a disability because we work in that area. And so Lenny has a university degree. We did an interview which was facilitated very well. I asked him for some proof of his output, and he sent me a report that he had written. And so now I'm working with Lenny, and yeah, there are some learnings, and generally speaking, I don't know whether that can be extrapolated to all other people, but it's maybe only for him personally. But his attitude is fantastic in terms of his motivation to always try his hardest and his best, which is, I think, one of the most important factors is that you give it your best, and you try and you keep pushing until you have a certain result. And yeah, that is really important. I feel that there are not much difference compared to anybody else that I work with. He's working from home, and so are most of the other people at the Center for Technology Infusions, unless they need to be at the university to make stuff. But he works from home. Whenever I want to reach him, he responds, very responsive. He just does his work wherever he is. And if I ask him, would you like to join at this event? Generally speaking, he will say yes. And somehow he will make his way there. Sometimes he's brought by his father. Sometimes, if it's not too difficult, he takes public transport, or sometimes a taxi. And then he's there. And then he can experience kind of firsthand what kind of work that we do. For instance, he was there when we did interviews with the Northern Health staff, and the interviews were regarding remote monitoring in people's homes. So there are sensors that look after people that live alone and that are at high risk of going back to the hospital. And then that system gives data to the hospital and can monitor the person's movements and sleep and toileting patterns. And that helps them to keep an eye out. Is everything still as per normal, or is it deteriorating? And then they can intervene. So we interviewed the users of the system at Northern Health Hospital, and Lenny was there with me doing the interviews. And then consequently, he helped making the report, which requires first to use our notes that we made from the meeting, then order them, team them, and then put them in a report. And given that he's only 1 year graduate from university, he did a really, really good job on that. And so that's something that I'm trying to get into more of, because it's something that I really don't enjoy, writing reports. So I would love to have somebody who's good at that and who can then be at those interviews and collect data and start at least writing the basic report. So that is an example of work that went very well. One thing that maybe a learning is I would love to be able to have somebody who does proofreading, who does the little dots and the little I's, and the real nitty-gritty details when you are almost ready to have a final report. There's also some forms that need to be filled in for ethics applications. So everything that the university does when it collects data and involves humans, those humans are then kind of protected by the ethics committee at the university, who looks after the interest of those humans that participate in the research. So the forms that need to be filled in order to get ethics approval need to be done very meticulously in order to make sure that they don't find anything to make you change your form, because they only meet once a month. So once you make a mistake, your setback is 1 month. So that needs to be done very meticulously, and maybe because of his vision impairment, maybe just because of him as a person, that's not his strength, looking after those kind of tiny, gritty details. Well, that's something that I found out, and I will find another solution for that. So these are some of my impressions of working with Lenny, and I hope that they're applicable to anybody else. But I think that we are kind of fortunate to be in a position that we have a lot of projects and a lot of demand for our services. So that means I have a little bit of flexibility to use this as an experiment. So and that has allowed me to kind of see, okay, we hire first and then we'll see what the output will be and what suits Lenny best. So I will just tailor the work that he needs to do to what he can do, because the most important thing is that we do work with a person with a lived disability experience, because we're working in that area. So I hope that's been kind of useful to share. And if you have any questions, then please ask away.
Thank you very much, Eric, for sharing that and sharing such a leveled experience of Eye to the Future and working within this space and sharing what you're doing at La Trobe University. It's fantastic to hear about that. In the interest of time, I would like to move to our next section of our presentation. And if there are any questions, we will have some question and answer time a little bit later in the session. So if you do have questions, please pop your hand up and we'll come through to you for those questions. Now I will introduce Tim Davey from An Eye to the Future, who's going to take us through the next part of our presentation. Tim, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm not sure. Is my camera working? Yeah, cool. Hi, everyone. So my name's Tim Davey. A little bit about me first off. My experience comes from 12 years of working in the Housing Trust of South Australia, so the South Australian Housing Trust, in multiple different roles within project management, also quite heavily involved in policy development, and a number of years working on the sa.gov.au website, developing accessible online web content. And just recently, that sort of brought me over to BCA. So I've just started at the start of this year with Blind Citizens Australia, working as a project officer with the Eye to the Future team, which is very exciting, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to be here. So 3 months in, and the first workshop which we're putting together now. So yeah, go easy. But yes, thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. So just to lay out a bit of the session we'll be going through today before we get into it. First off, we'll be looking at just introducing the job access and the employee assistance fund. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, or just to recap and sort of just lead into how we're going to sort of attack the case studies and get more into the detail. And then, yeah, we've got 3 case studies to go through. So it's looking at individuals all with different circumstances with their vision impairment and how they're going to navigate through the Employee Assistance Fund and that process. So hopefully that's useful for people. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll go through each case study in full first, and then we'll have a little section at the end for questions or comments. And yeah, I'll try and go relatively slowly. What I might do is just have a quick pause after each kind of like paragraph within the case study. And if anyone needs me to repeat anything, I'm happy to do so. Also, don't worry. I mean, as we've mentioned, the session's being recorded, and if anyone's curious about the case studies and wants to receive them after the session, happy to do that as well, because they are quite detailed as well. So yeah, unless there's yeah, we'll get straight into it, I think, and we'll have some time for questions at the end of the first case study. So a little bit about job access and the Employee Assistance Fund first. So they are the national hub for workplace and employment support for people with disabilities and also employers. Their goal is to provide free support to help remove barriers to employing people with disability. So obviously, we at Blind Citizens Australia would be helping in the support of anyone with blindness or vision impairment, but job access look at disability across the board, not just vision impairment. So that's important to take note of. So the actual fund itself, the EAF, Employee Assistance Fund, is run by Job Access and covers all the costs associated with hiring people with disability. So that's ranging from software and hardware requirements through to Auslan services for deaf individuals, or training and support in general across the board, as well as any physical workplace modifications that might need to be implemented within your workplace, like ramps, accessible toilets, all sorts of things. So that's a little bit about what the fund will cover. And when they're looking at that, Job Access do conduct workplace assessments with the employers and the employees and any support staff as well that might be involved, which help identify all of those requirements, whether it be personal requirements or software requirements, or those physical things that might need to happen in the workplace, which might just be something as simple as removing clutter and that kind of thing for someone who has a vision impairment, for instance. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit about Job Access and the Employee Assistance Fund, which hopefully will give some context into the first case study. So yeah, we'll get straight into the case studies. So the first one we're looking at is for Brian Long. So this is a person with low vision who's applying for a data analyst role. So Brian is a 36-year-old man with a keen interest in research and data analysis, particularly in the fields of public health. He's got a bachelor in public health and is looking to enter the workforce as a person who was diagnosed with low vision 8 years ago. So New South Wales Health are looking for a new data analyst role in their Cancer Institute division and would like to employ Brian on a part-time basis for 2 days a week. And they like to use that the help from the Employee Assistance Fund to do that. So they provided him with a 6-month contract beginning in 2 weeks, which he has signed and returned to them. So Brian has linked his own MyGov account with Job Access as an individual, and is able to lodge his own application for the Employee Assistance Fund, including the proposed start date, as he's received that with his contract. So there are multiple ways in which that can happen. That can be Brian as an individual lodging it. It can also be the employer, or it could be the support person. So that's important to note. In this case, we're looking at Brian completing it himself. So in terms of Brian's eligibility, which will be verified in his application, in this case, he meets the eligibility for the minimum hours of 8 hours per week and minimum contract of 13 weeks or over. So this is what the Employee Assistance Fund dictates that an individual should be receiving in order to receive support. So because he's part-time 2 days a week, he meets those requirements, and it's a 6-month contract, so he's over that 13 weeks that is required. Brian's vision impairment is ongoing and expected to be ongoing indefinitely. So again, this meets the assessment requirements that the EAF dictates, which his disability has or will last for 2+ years, and it does indeed limit his ability to work. So that's something that, yeah, they measure in order to provide that support. So other requirements in terms of eligibility, Brian has to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, which he is in this case. He has to provide a signed employee contract in order to receive that support, and any supporting documentation as well should also be included in his application. So things like medical certificates from GPs which outline his condition, and any other sort of supporting documentation as well. So Brian requires this screen magnifying software. In this case, it's Zoom Text. And as Brian will assume ownership of the software for his personal use, he can either purchase it himself, and he can then be reimbursed by Job Access if his application is approved, of course. Alternatively, if he's unable to cover the initial costs, which can often happen as some of these softwares and things are quite expensive, the hiring organization can do this on his behalf, and also be reimbursed by Job Access once that application is approved. For reimbursement to be provided, the application, obviously, like I said, must first be approved. And the span of time, generally, what they say is about 6 weeks, although typically it can happen well within that time frame. We've seen applications approved in around the 10-day mark. And again, it just sort of depends on each one, how complicated they might be, if it's just a software or hardware thing, or if there are physical modifications that need to happen. Quite often that can make things take a little bit longer. So yeah, in terms of the reimbursement, the request needs to be lodged with Job Access within 21 days of the approval. Typically, these are approved once lodged. They're typically approved within the first week. Even earlier than that can be a couple of days, really, provided everything is sort of straightforward and has been pre-approved, and it's all good. So the other thing that can happen is that Job Access can arrange a no cost workplace modifications assessment, which essentially just means that they're coming into the office or the space where the employee is going to be commencing work, and just ensuring that it's an accessible space, that there are no hazards, that they're talking with Brian, any support people he might have, and the employer, New South Wales Health, in order to just make sure that he's got everything that he needs, that the space is going to be effective for him. So what we're talking about in this case is that if the modifications assessment has occurred, they've determined that LED lighting should be installed for Brian's cubicle, as that's a cooler and more illuminating solution, which will help with his low vision. And that's considered a reasonable adjustment to assist him in his work, which can be quite a common thing with the lighting. Being a physical adjustment to the workplace, ownership and responsibility of that, the LED lighting should fall to New South Wales Health to arrange to pay for this. Though once again, it's likely that that will be approved and that will be able to be reimbursed via job access. They've got a specific budget for physical adjustments to the workplace. So yeah, there shouldn't be any issues with approving that cost. So the other thing I guess to say about that is that, and sometimes the reason why they can take a little bit longer is that they're for physical adjustments to the workplace. Sometimes you need agreement from building owners and things like that, which can elongate the process. But that's just something to be aware of as well, is that that's something that job access require, is that agreement from the building owner if there are any modifications to the workplace itself. So Brian's manager agrees to allow him to work from home in the initial stage as well, while the lighting upgrades are made for his cubicle. So this is something that helps everyone really. If there are physical adjustments that need to take place, it can assist Brian to start when he needs to start, while those modifications are underway. And also a further recommendation is made from job access about the clutter in the walkways, which will make it safer for Brian to navigate around the office. So so Brian meets all of his eligibility requirements. His application is approved in 2 weeks from the date he lodged, which allows him to commence his employment on the planned start date. So that concludes the first case study. So if anyone has any comments or questions at this point, there's one in particular that I have in my mind that we haven't talked about, but like to throw it out to the room now. I know it's a lot of information, but does anyone have any contributions to make? Nothing from anyone? Is anyone on mute?
It's Maddie here. I just wanted to quickly remind people to raise your hand on a computer. You can also use the keyboard command Alt+Y, the Alt and plus the Y key to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question.
Looks like we've got Alicia with a hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Tim. I was just wondering with the software and that, is that something that potentially NDIS would fund or not?
That's a good question. They could potentially. I'm not entirely sure about what the NDIS do. If anyone else in the room has any idea about that?
Tim, it's Sally. So I think in this context, because it is so specifically work related, the NDIS would defer to Job Access and the Employee Assistance Fund to fund the technology. If the technology was more for day-to-day use or perhaps even education, that's a situation where the person may, depending on their individual goals, might be able to access funding through the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. That was a great question. Kelly, looks like she's got a hand up as well. And she looks like she might be on mute if you want to. There we go. Did you have a question there, Kelly?
Can you hear me?
Yep, got you.
Yeah, okay, there we go. So just in terms of the Zoom text and the software being installed in the workplace, if Ryan was to work from home, would they be able to duplicate that software on his home equipment as well? Or would it be expected that he take a laptop to and from the workplace?
That's a good one. So what can happen is that, say with Brian's, in Brian's instance, he might already actually have the software that he needs on his personal device. If he's worked in the past, for instance, it's something that he's been living with for a while. So he could have what he needs on his own personal device. Generally, I believe the job access application would be to install the software on his work device. So I guess like in the meantime, while his application is approved, what could happen is that an arrangement could be made for him to work from home if he can. If he can't, then they might just have to elongate that process a little bit and perhaps even push his start date back. In order to get him, in order for that software and everything that he needs to be approved so that he can best do his job when he does start, if he doesn't have what he needs already. But it should really be for the work device, I believe, with the Employee Assistance Fund and what's available there.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Okay, so I mean that sort of touches on what the question that I had in my mind was, if it's if Brian's application isn't approved by Job Access before he's due to start, which we sort of talked about there, but if that does happen, then there is some flexibility as well. It's important to note with Job Access, partial approvals can be made potentially. So if he just has like a screen reading software as part of his application, but then there's also a recommendation to make some physical workplace adjustments, which might, for instance, take a bit longer. If there's going to be a delay there that could encroach on his start date, then what might happen is that a partial approval could be made to allow him to get that screen reading software approved, and he might be able to then work from home in that initial phase once he has that software. And then obviously the rest of the application can be approved as it's seen fit, with the physical adjustments that might be taking a little bit longer to assess. So yeah, working from home arrangements can be a good way to sort of work around that. And yeah, like I said, if it comes down to it, then that start date might actually need to be pushed back if we're still waiting, and he doesn't have any other sort of options to start without that approval. So they're generally pretty good, Job Access. They're generally pretty quick and open communicators. So they'll let you know how that process is going, and if there are going to be any difficulties with certain parts of it. And from everything I understand, they're quite good to work with in that regard. So you'll definitely be aware of where that application sits and what arrangements need to be made. So are there any other questions about Brian? If not, we can move on to the next case study. Sorry, yeah, we've got a hand up.
It's Nell again.
Yep.
Hi, Tim. I have a question. If as part of the personal or work adjustments includes training of some type, and if that training comes from another provider to the employee, from not the employee, but the employee engages an external provider for that training, does Job Access cover the accessibility of that training, not just accessing or paying for that training, but the accessibility of that environment or that program from that provider as well?
That's a good point. Geez, I wouldn't want to answer this without sort of knowing completely. But I'd imagine they would probably work with that provider, like part of their approval process would be working with that training provider to ensure that that training is going to be accessible. That would make sense to me in my mind. But yeah, I mean, it's something that I can look into a bit further and come back to you with, unless Sally or anyone else is able to answer that on my behalf with a bit more certainty.
Yeah, I think, sorry, it's Sally here. When you say the accessibility, what are you referring to by that? Just to make sure I understand your question in its completeness.
Sure. So hypothetically, if the new employee needs to access training in another venue, and they provide perhaps pre-reading material, or it's in a particular place, does job access also cover the physical accessibility of that place, or prompt that provider to provide information or resources in accessible format that suits the new employee, et cetera, or does that fall under the employer to liaise with that training provider to ensure those boxes are sort of checked?
Yeah, I would say that the first preference would be to utilise a training provider where the services that they provide are accessible. I think when it comes to training material, say pre-reading, it is up to the training provider to be able to provide that in an alternate format. Chances are, in most situations, most people already have that. And if you just ask for it, they do generally have a Word version of something that is in an accessible format. And if we were looking at, say, the physical accessibility of the building, something that might require modifications or something quite large, that would be a case-by-case basis for job access. Say it was like a one-day training course, job access probably wouldn't, put in a talking lift or something that's just not economically viable. But they might look at alternate arrangements to be able to make sure that the training is accessible, and then look to work with the training provider to make those modifications to their service into the future. But yeah, definitely a case-by-case basis for the accessibility of the space for sure.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks for that question, Nilgan. Well, I'm just a bit conscious of time as well now, so we'll move on to the next one. But these are really great questions. Thanks everyone for contributing, and there will definitely be opportunities after to send anything through if you're feeling like you didn't get a chance to ask anything. So we'll move on to the next case study. So we've got Imogen Whitaker here for the next case study. So she's a person with a newly acquired vision loss. She has a support worker and a requirement for assistive technology. So a little bit about Imogen first. So she's 32. She has a Bachelor of Information Technology and 8 years experience working as an ICT project delivery and support. So she's currently working full-time as an ICT project officer with the Australian Electoral Commission. And she was just recently diagnosed with blurred vision. So after taking some time off for her own health, well-being, she's now assessing how best to move forward in her personal and professional life. And to do that, she's got a support worker on board, because obviously this is all new for her. So she's needing a little bit extra support to figure out the next steps. So she's a highly skilled user of IT systems and software, but is now needing to learn how to navigate using JAWS for the first time, which is a screen reading assistive technology. So her support worker has received permission from Imogen to submit her application to the EAF on her behalf. So in this case, when the support worker is doing this, that support worker is responsible for being the go-between and updating the employer and the employee on the progress of that application with job access and anything required of the parties involved. And when undertaking that process, she's required to list, the support worker is required to list their own personal and contact information so that they can coordinate that process in between, the employee and employer. So we just talked a little bit about training before. For Imogen, she obviously, this is all brand new to her. And even though she's someone who has experience in the IT world, it's very, very different. It's a very big, different adjustment to make. So she will likely need training and technical support, which is something that can be procured and funded through Job Access and the Employee Assistance Fund to help her learn that new assistive technology. So there's also orientation and mobility training available for Imogen to ensure that she's confident commuting between work and home and navigating her new workplace. Obviously, for Imogen in this case, it's something that she's just recently undergone. So she's likely to need training and that kind of thing or just time to get used to navigating to and fro the workplace as well. So that's something that can be definitely covered in that job access process. So Imogen's new colleagues might not have worked with someone who has a vision impairment before, and they have some questions about how to support her in the office. So once again, on the topic of training, there is disability awareness training, which is able to be accessed through Job Access. And this is something that's available for all staff, not just those with a disability. So I guess it's particularly for those without, really, in order to best support staff members that may have a vision impairment or other disability. So the cost of the training for this falls with the organisation to pay initially, and again can be reimbursed by Job Access on the approval of that application, which is likely to happen. So we blazed through that one. Sorry if I'm going a little bit too quickly now. Hopefully it's still being absorbed, but I'd like to now throw a question out to the group about Imogen and her situation. So just wondering what you think might be some reasonable adjustments that the AEC could make, the Electoral Commission, where she's working, to allow Imogen to transition easier into her new role. If anyone has any ideas, or even just other questions about Imogen's situation. Kelly, I've got a hand up.
Possibly allowing additional time for retraining in systems and processes and things like that, and providing additional support. Yeah, definitely. Well done. Yeah, definitely time to learn. She's definitely going to need that extra time. She might need training. She might need to look at her own working conditions, opening up to part-time hours potentially, or working from home if she requests to do so, of course. And this might just be a temporary thing while she navigates her vision impairment. And I guess just the other thing is just understanding that it is a vast change. Just because she's in that industry doesn't mean that she can just pick up a new software like that, particularly when she's dealing with something that's all very new to her and can be quite scary as well. So I guess the other thing is just for
for the AEC to realize that she's got so much experience in the industry in those roles as well. So you know, that it's worth investing in time with Imogen and their people in general. You know, people that have those skills and knowledge, invest that time in them, help and support them with anything that they need, and in turn that will yeah, come back to the organization and reward them as well. So yeah, is there anything else? Any other questions about the Imogen case study? We might actually have to, I don't want to keep people longer than is necessary. We thought we could maybe a little bit ambitious to think we could get it done in an hour. But we do have one more case study, but we might just have to leave that one. And again, happy to send it through. But yeah, conscious of time and don't want to be encroaching on people's schedules. So yeah, sorry, unless there's any other questions about Imogen quickly, or anything else about the job access or employee assistance fund process, yeah, do let us know. Nilgan, yeah, I'm gonna hand up. Kelly,
I just have a general question. What are the real sticking points or challenges that applicants may face? What are some of the common hurdles or things from job access from the new employee point of view and employer potentially?
Yeah. In terms of you know, having funding and things approved for them through this process, is that what you mean? Or
it could relate to that, or it could just be, you know, following that also. What are some challenges or sticking points? I don't know, there might not be any. It might be so smooth and everything gets approved and goes well. Yeah. But just wondering if there's some common experience scenarios for the difficult side to all that.
For sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I've only been in the organization for 3 months, so I can't really speak to anything like that. But hopefully, maybe to put Sally on the spot again, maybe she could chime in if she has.
I could add some value if that helps. I've just recently been through a process similar to the scenario case study.
Yeah, go for it, and then I'll chime in at the end. Feel free.
So the biggest roadblock we had was time. Waiting for assessments, waiting for workplace assessments, waiting for equipment to be delivered, waiting for reports to come through, and then waiting for approval on things. So for our participant, we run a 16-week program, and so time was really against us, and just trying to ensure that she was actually able to commence on the commencement date with all of the required equipment, programs and support that she needed to be able to do her job successfully. So yeah, that was the biggest roadblock for us.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. I think in terms of a government department, job access has to be the most responsive government organisation I've ever worked with, especially in the last couple of years. I find their turnaround times are really efficient, but it is waiting for things like someone who's qualified to give a workplace assessment. That can definitely be a big hold up. And I think one of the other things too is sometimes when a person needs a piece of technology and the employer or their IT department might not be familiar with it, and therefore there's a little bit of a fear and uncertainty that comes from that lack of familiarity. So it's being able to have those really informed conversations around, well, this is the software that I need, and this is why, and this is how it's going to interact with the programs that we operate. And those conversations can be really challenging, but I think they're a really important part of having everything that you need set up in the way that you need it so that you can thrive in your workplace. Thanks, Tim.
It's Maddie, and I would, second what you're saying there, Sally, about job access being quite responsive to the individual and the needs, and also prioritising based on the urgency. That there will always be some degree of waiting for these things to be put into place, but they are very responsive from my experience. They are quite responsive. So I did just want to second that, Sally, and what you said. And thank you, Tim, for sharing those case studies, and everyone who has joined us today. We are coming to a close, but I would like to thank Eric for joining us today and sharing your experience with An Eye to the Future. And I am aware that we didn't get to throw out to any questions. So I will just quickly open up for questions to Eric, if Eric is still with us. Whilst we have a few minutes of extra time left, did we have any questions for Eric? That is more than okay. If you do think of any questions that you have from today's session, whether it's for Eric, Tim, or Eye to the Future, Blind Citizens Australia in general, please feel free to send them through to us in an email. We will be sending you out a follow-up email with some resources and more information, and we would welcome a conversation with you if you do have any more questions, or you would like to know a little bit more about employing someone who's blind or vision impaired in your organisation, and we can have a chat with you about the wonderful candidates that we have nationally across Australia. We are a national program, and we have candidates in most states, but particularly the Eastern Seaboard. We have lots of wonderful candidates looking for roles.
Thanks, Maddie. I have to go.
Thank you very much for joining us, Eric.
Share my experience with Lenny, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much.
Or if we have plenty of work, if anybody on this call knows somebody who is available on a casual basis, please contact Maddie.
Thank you very much.
That concludes today's webinar. You can find out more at eyetothefuture.com.au. An Eye to the Future is an initiative of Blind Citizens Australia, informing, connecting and empowering Australians who are blind or vision impaired.